Starbase 804 was gone. Picard gazed over the ruins. 78 people had been stationed here, humans, Vulcans, a family of Klingon archaeologists, children, pets, dreams, all gone. Absorbed into the monstrous cube that had risen in the center of the base, towering 30 meters above them, ominous and all-devouring. The alien graveyard of the raw materials assimilated from the Starbase in only 3 days. He felt as if the extinction of Starbase 804 marked the end for the Federation as well, because the Borg that had been at work here were unlike any Starfleet had faced before. Starfleet's greatest fear had become real. There were indeed other branches of the Borg collective active in the galaxy. Beverly shook her head. Her voice betrayed the aching sense of loss they both felt. This makes no sense. It must make sense, Beverly. They are machines, ruled by logic. What they are doing has to fit their program purpose to survive. For 3 days, he and Beverly and Weinlein's team had to watch as the Starbase melted before them. For the same 3 days, frustration had grown in him because there was no Borg vessel here to recover. Picard felt the vibration of the communicator in his armor. It was Weinlein. She was on the other side of the Borg structure, a kilometer away. Krul and Bayer have completed the scan of the cube. Absolutely no indication of a propulsion system. No field coils, no warp core, not even any propellant. Picard nodded. That proves they are waiting to be retrieved. But Weinlein didn't agree. By what? Anything that could pick up that cube by tractor or by transporter could have lifted the Starbase out of here in minutes. Picard frowned. The material at Starbase 804 had included 2 runabouts and 6 shuttles. Why weren't their propulsion systems incorporated intact into the cube? Because the cube didn't need to go anywhere. Because something was coming to retrieve it. Picard looked at Weinlein. You and I have been through this before. Yes, Captain. And I was willing to wait to see what the Borg would do, to give you the benefit of the doubt. But I have no more doubt. All the Borg in that cube have been in sleep mode for more than 3 hours. There are no further signs of construction or modification. Therefore, in accordance with our orders, we will proceed with our secondary mission. Rendezvous in 15 minutes. Behind the barracks wall. Weinlein out. Once again, it was time to engage the Borg. In the deepening twilight, Picard and Beverly crept across the broken ground toward the barracks wall. Weinlein hissed, "Get down!" Picard and Beverly dropped to the ground behind the wall. Weinlein, Krul, and Bayer already crouched in position. Weinlein jerked a finger at the tricorder mounted on her forearm. She gave Picard a cold grin. Still no movement, fish in a barrel. Even if they're expecting some kind of mothership to come for them, what are the odds that will happen in the next 20 minutes? Picard looked puzzled. Why 20 minutes? Weinlein pulled on her battle helmet. Because that's how long this is going to take. We only need 10 of the humanoids. Shelby's people say that's double the minimum required to maintain a group mind when they're cut off from their branch of the collective. I know the theory. But what does Shelby say the rest of the Borg will do as we make off with their fellows? The commander says that once they see you, they'll be trying to make contact with Locutus. That's why you'll be front and center. You'll be verbally activating all their internal diagnostic subroutines while we collect our 10. Picard shrugged. You saw what happened when I attempted that with the unfortunate woman who stopped me on our first day here. I only delayed her for a few minutes at best. Weinlein ignored his protest as she checked her tricorder. The monitor will be overhead in 7 minutes, 30 seconds. While you delay the Borg response, my people and I will slap these on our 10 targets, then the monitor beams us all out. Picard tugged his helmet on. You obviously don't think the Borg will activate their shields. Weinlein put her gloved hand on her visor. Not if Locutus tells them not to. We start forward in 1 minute. Beverly turned to Weinlein. What about me? After all 4 of us are inside, you take up position immediately outside the airlock. If all goes well, you just sit tight till the monitor locks on. And if all doesn't go well, whatever else happens, Picard has to come out. Weinlein held her finger over a forearm control. Microburst signal to the monitor in 3, 2, 1, mark. She pressed the controls, sending an untraceable coded message to the starship, setting it in motion to be in position for the emergency beam-out. "Stand by, Captain Picard. We go in 8, 7... Picard began to pull down his visor. A double flash of blue light flickered at his side. "Resistance is futile." Picard instinctively pulled Beverly away behind him as he turned to face the two Borg that had materialized 2 meters away with all the suddenness the Borg transporter was known for. Both cybernetic creatures had arms that ended in the glowing discharge nodes of antimatter streamers. Even as Wineline yelled at Picard to take off his helmet, Picard stepped forward to confront the enemy. "No." The Borg instantly looked at him, instantly froze. "Locutus?" Then both Borg dissolved in a slow pulse of quantum mist. Bear barked over the comm circuit. "Frequency 1 used." Cruel snapped back. "Engaging random frequency selection." The individual force fields that protected combat-ready Borg constantly adapted to whatever weaponry was trained against them. No one phaser frequency could be used more than once because the force fields around every other Borg in the collective would immediately change to repel that frequency. Wineline grabbed Picard's arm. "Let's move it. We need those prisoners." Picard pulled back. "No. They've always known we were here. Think. They didn't beam to get us until we sent the microburst to bring the Monitor out of hiding." "You're saying this is a trap?" Picard felt an incongruous bubble of laughter rise up in him. It was so obvious. "They don't want us. They don't care about us. They want the Monitor." Wineline stared over the wall at the dark cube towering over the devastated starbase. "But they have no weaponry installed in that thing. No propulsion systems." "Because they're the bait." Wineline swore in a Klingon dialect, then jabbed the communicator contact at her neck. "Archangel, this is Red Leader. Override Alpha Alpha 1 Alpha. You're heading into an ambush. Confirm." Picard heard all the confirmation he needed. Subspace static. All communications channels were being jammed. The source was the cube. Beverly looked up from her own tricorder. "We are now within a Borg force field. No beam-out possible." Wineline looked stricken. Picard recognized the expression as the look of a commander who has run out of options. In contrast, Picard felt his own control increase. "Lieutenant Wineline, as captain, I am countermanding all of Commander Shelby's orders. I am now in command of this mission. Listen carefully. There is a working transporter in that cube, as well as a force field generator and whatever equipment they are using to jam subspace. Our objective is to take control of all 3 systems." Wineline looked confused. "If you don't want us to take prisoners, why not just blow it up?" "Because somewhere up there is a Borg ship waiting for the Monitor. That is our target. The mission's primary objective is once again within our reach. We go back to the original plan." Picard reached to Beverly, handed her the phaser, and pulled the small carry-all pod from her belt. The interface. It was cold to the touch as he pulled it out. A thick cable came out with it, designed to be plugged into the plate and the power cell already in place beneath his armor. It was the same outward size, shape, and appearance as the one the Borg had attached to his skull. The Borg cube loomed in the darkness, surrounded by the glow from its blue and red power conduits. Picard ran for it, leading his team. When they were 20 meters from the main airlock, Picard knew the only reason the Borg hadn't already attacked was because the collective's group mind would be analyzing its loss of its first group of soldiers. Their next response would be calculated to be overwhelming, and after several seconds, it was. A blinding flash of blue light came from the side opposite Wineline's approach. The new configuration was bipedal, but 3 meters tall, with piston-like legs and thick, crushing discs for footpads. Phaser beams streaked past Picard and flared in a blinding halo around the Borg giant. The sudden light revealed a small, impassive, humanoid head centered protectively in the Borg's immense shoulder blades. It was the only biological component visible. Picard saw Beverly recoil at the sight. The Borg Colossus advanced, untouched. Bayer called out to the team. "They've adapted to the base phaser pattern." Wineline gave new orders. "Discard phasers. Cruel, you're a go." The powerful Klingon lunged past Picard. The Borg's arms swung down on him, intent on dismembering him. But Cruel fired a Klingon thruster gun first. Undetected, the metal projectile punched into the creature's implanted breastplate before the collective could reconfigure its defenses. It began to topple. From Cruel's throat rose a Klingon victory cry. He drove his fists into the air, just as an antimatter stream spurted from the glowing node of one falling Borg arm. The incandescent beam sliced neatly through Cruel's legs, mid-thigh, and the Klingon fell. A particle cannon turret instantly swung out from the cube's side toward Picard and his team, and just as Picard dove for cover in the dirt, another explosion flared above him. He got to his feet and turned to Beverly. "What about Cruel?" "His armor's life support will cut off the bleeding and deliver stimulants. He can hold on till it's safe to get him." Then she pulled Picard into a pit carved by an earlier explosion. Wineline was there, setting up a photon mortar. She glanced at him. "Are you ready? We've got one more cannon to take out. Then you can get to the main airlock." Another explosion went off at the side of the cube. Picard heard thudding. Then Bear leaped down into the pit. "That's the last cannon. I'm going for Cruel." As Bear took off toward Cruel, Picard sprinted for the airlock. The cube looked badly damaged. Behind him, Bear shouted a warning. The thorax of the fallen Borg construct opened like a metal flower. Next to the construct, Cruel still screamed out his challenges, unaware. Bear struggled to wrap his arm around Cruel's writhing form while he aimed a hand disruptor at the opening in the construct. But the beam dissipated against the Borg force field. Behind it, 8 gleaming metal spider legs unfurled from the thorax as if testing the air. A Borg scuttler had emerged. Bear yelled at Picard to keep running as the cybernetic insect raised 4 of its legs, then angled down toward Bear and sank them into him like a living javelin. The scuttler turned in a blur to Cruel. Wineline charged the scuttler, and the scuttler raised 3 legs and thrust at Wineline. Her side was pierced, but as the scuttler lifted 2 more legs to try and impale her again, Wineline struck it, and it toppled from Cruel's body. Picard heard the telltale whine of an overload building in a phaser pre-fire cell. Picard could see Wineline. The team leader stood tall. Her arms were not raised to deflect the scuttler's next blow. Picard held Beverly's face against his chest, but he watched until it was over. White light blazed into the depths of the Borg cube, stretching before them, followed by the crack of the explosion. Only a smoking crater remained. Wineline and Cruel were gone. But Picard's chance to fulfill the mission still remained because of Wineline's sacrifice. Picard grimaced as a sharp feedback whine cut through the open communicator circuit. "Red Leader, 1, this is Archangel." The monitor had arrived, and her more powerful equipment had managed to punch through the Borg jamming. "A cube ship has just dropped from Transwarp. It is closing in to engage." Picard slammed his fist against the communicator contact. "Negative. Captain Lewinsky, do not engage the Borg. Repeat, do not engage the Borg. They are ready for you. Pull back at maximum warp. Allow the cube ship time to recover their assimilation crew down here." Picard heard the disappointment in Lewinsky's voice, tempered by imperceptible relief. "Acknowledged, Captain. Godspeed." Suddenly, a Borg appeared in front of Picard, who shoved Beverly to the side, weapon held ready. "You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile." Automatically, Picard accepted the challenge. "Are you defective?" The Borg stepped forward. "You are not qualified to assess my operational status." Picard held the torch to his face. "Are you certain?" The Borg stopped in his tracks. "Locutus?" His weapon was lowered. Picard motioned urgently to Beverly. She approached the Borg, placed a hypospray against a small patch of exposed flesh at the base of its jaw, then pulled its cerebral cables free as it collapsed to the deck. She smiled shakily at Picard. "What do you know? It worked." Picard looked for a way deeper into the cube. As if a bomb concussion wave had moved past him, he lurched forward, slamming into a bulkhead made of mismatched pipes and metal patches. Beverly staggered back at the same instant. What was that? All around them, the cube creaked and groaned. Picard glanced back outside, past the jagged opening. All the ground, in a 50-meter circle around the cube, was moving skyward. In the light of the concentrated stars of the new Titan sky, Picard could see the rest of the planet's surface rush away. They were in the grip of a Borg tractor beam. Picard looked at Beverly. "We are being retrieved." The mission was proceeding exactly as Starfleet had planned. Exactly as he had feared. The stripped-down single-level bridge of the Monitor was cramped, but only because of the extra shielding that surrounded it. Captain John Lewinsky liked that about his ship. As far as her specs were concerned, she was virtually indestructible. He turned to his communications officer. "Any more signals from the surface?" Ardev turned from his station. "The Borg have completely jammed all frequencies." Lewinsky angled his chair toward his science officer. "Sensors?" Science Officer T'Pur remained serene as always. "The Borg are generating a sensor blanket, sir." Though Lewinsky had followed Picard's suggestion to withdraw at maximum warp, he had taken the Monitor behind the new Titan's system gas giant, cloaked, and returned to a geostationary orbit above whatever was left of Starbase 804. The Borg cube ship was also holding a geostationary position. Lewinsky turned his chair to face the screen and told his navigator, "Take us in, Mr. Land. I want to look up their tailpipe." The Monitor surged forward at quarter impulse and was in visual contact with the Borg cube ship within seconds. Lewinsky looked grim. Definitely a tractor beam. Land adjusted the view screen's image, angling it away from the Borg cube ship toward New Titan. At the base of the tractor beam was the Starbase. Science Officer T'Pur checked her monitor. "Life signs on the tractored mass. 40 Borg, 2 assimilated animals." Lewinsky scratched his fingers through his beard. "Bottom line, mister, any of the red team on that?" T'Pur's fingers flew skillfully over her science panel. "Medical telemetry from armor belonging to Picard and Crusher, sir. No injuries." On the screen, the tractored chunk of planet was nothing more than a dark smear when it vanished inside the ship, which began to rotate until it had changed its orientation to New Titan. On the screen, the Borg ship disappeared in a flash of light. Lewinsky called to T'Pur. "Sensors," T'Pur reported. "The Borg vessel generated and then entered a transwarp conduit." Lewinsky rubbed his hands over his face. "Lieutenant Ardev, contact Commander Shelby at Starbase 324. Tell her Picard and Crusher are on board a Borg vessel, but that vessel is now in transwarp and we are unable to pursue." Land twisted around in his chair to look at his captain. "Can't we try to search for them, sir?" Lewinsky sighed, deeply grateful he wasn't Picard. "The way those conduits move through other dimensional space, Mr. Land, their heading at entry wouldn't tell us anything. I'm afraid that Captain Picard and Dr. Crusher have just gone where no one has gone before." The steady pulse of the Avatar's singularity generators throbbed in the corridors of the ship. Salatrell stood in the corridor outside the Starfleet holodeck, which the Borg had helpfully assimilated from one of the Starfleet's vessels they had defeated since arriving in the quadrant. Judging from the way Kirk was reacting to meeting her holographic duplicate in a recreation of his home region of Iowa, the illusion was perfect. Vox stood beside Salatrell. "Kirk is lying." Salatrell folded her arms. "The collective's thinking is too binary. My medical scans show he's merely confused. That is to be expected at this stage of his conditioning. Our analysis of the regeneration device indicated that his memories should have returned intact. The collective provided the technology required to return Kirk to functional status. He is not functional. This project should be terminated." "You still don't understand what we are doing here. Consider, who is the greatest villain ever to subvert the will of the Romulan people?" Salatrell watched as Vox's stern expression seemed to soften, as if that part of him which was still Romulan was being released from that which was Borg. "A butcher of Icarus IV, James Tiberius Kirk." The tragic story of the Battle of Icarus IV was known to every Romulan child. How the first cloaked Romulan vessel had set out to probe the Earth's outposts belligerently arrayed at the boundaries of the neutral zone. And how, after her successful mission, but before her triumphant return, Kirk and his ship had defeated her commander by dishonorable tactics, feigning helplessness near the tail of the Icarus comet to lure the Romulan vessel to her destruction. To Romulans, if Kirk had fired upon women and children who had raised their arms in surrender, it could be no greater crime. But Borg's severity returned to Vox. James Tiberius Kirk was a soldier. He did his duty to defend his territory. We could expect no less. These are the facts. Your grandfather was the commander of the first neutral zone penetration to test the cloaking device. James Tiberius Kirk killed your grandfather. Therefore, your involvement in this procedure is suspect. Salatrell marshaled her energy to defeat Vox, if only in words. In regard to the assimilation of the Federation, who is the greatest threat to the will of the collective? Jean-Luc Picard. Exactly. You sucked all the information you needed about the Federation and Starfleet from his mind when he was assimilated. And the other half of that equation is that somewhere, buried in Picard's mind, is all the information Starfleet needs to defeat you a second time. Can't you see the logic of the situation? You and I will turn our two greatest enemies against each other. The Romulan people at last have their revenge against Kirk, while the Borg will be able to remove the last barrier to their successful assimilation of the Federation. Only if Kirk accomplishes his mission in the 7 days remaining to him. We are working on a way to remove the nanites. He might last longer. No, the neuronic implant will kill him long before the nanites fatally reconfigure his body. To understand Kirk's personality in the time we have available, it was necessary to install a neuronic interface in order to make his thoughts available to us. It was not necessary to inform you of our action. Salatrell's body tensed with fury and fear. What else might Vox have done without her knowledge? Kirk is a Borg? A hint of a small smile appeared on Vox's taciturn features. No. Elements of his emotional makeup were downloaded for analysis. That is why I say he is lying. She decided to call Vox's bluff, the collective's bluff. Then why don't you assimilate him? Why don't you assimilate all of us? Whatever Vox thought was not apparent in his expression. We have a treaty, the Borg and the Romulan dissidents. You assist the collective in assimilating the Federation, and we allow the Star Empire to exist unassimilated, as a curiosity. Long-term study of an unassimilated culture will allow us to be more proficient in welcoming other cultures to the collective. It is an efficient use of our resources. Salatrell searched Vox's Romulan eye for the truth. Do you honestly expect me to believe that? Vox's expression remained unchanged. If you wish to survive, you have no choice. Resistance is futile. Unsettled, Salatrell checked the display screen again. On it, Kirk gently removed her duplicate's hand from his leg. What was wrong with him? That wasn't typical of Kirk either. Why is he doing that? Resisting her seduction. Salatrell strode to the arched entrance to the holodeck. Then the door slipped open with a gentle hiss of machinery, and Salatrell stepped through. Vox watched impassively as on the observation screen the holographic duplicate faded as the real Salatrell stepped up to Kirk. He watched as Salatrell switched off the closure on her tunic, allowing it to fall from her shoulders, so she stood before Kirk, naked. And Vox continued to watch as Kirk embraced the woman who had been his lover. In 7 days, Kirk would be dead. Shortly after, the Federation would fall. And then, despite their bargain, the Romulan Star Empire would also become fulfilled, as it too received the gift of bliss. The Borg had learned that lying was an excellent way to preserve resources. His sensor eye was unwavering in its concentration. A single tear fell, disregarded, from his single organic eye. Emotions were futile. The collective was all.
Damn hell Saltasnot.
Listening to Data curse, LaForge sighed and the visor of his helmet fogged up. The local temperature on Trilix was hovering around 50 Kelvin, and despite the heating elements built into his well-insulated environment suit, he felt the chill.
Data, exactly who taught you how to curse like that? Counselor Troy. She has told me that I must feel free to express my emotions.
LaForge decided it was time for a break. The ruins of the Trilix civilization had been frozen for hundreds of thousands of years, ever since the planet's sun had gone nova. A few more minutes delay in this library structure wouldn't make any difference.
Do me a favor, Data. See if you can make it through the next 14 days without a single curse word.
Data shrugged.
Why the hell not?
LaForge returned to his corner of the excavation. The tricorder had shown that the floor of the structure was littered with hundreds of cylindrical pieces of metal, which other archaeologists had identified as data keys designed to be placed into Trilix computer stations. Unfortunately, when Trilix Prime had gone nova, apparently without warning, all the computer systems on the planet had been wiped clean. But the data keys had encoded information in a different way, which left them unaffected by the radiation surge of the nova. Most archaeologists had concluded that when its sun had gone nova, Trilix had been embroiled in a war between its organic inhabitants and its artificial, machine-based life forms. Some scholars had taken that to mean that organic life and synthetic life could never live in peace. Since LaForge had first met Data, the android had always had an interest in the Trilix question, as it was known. LaForge stopped firing the phaser and checked his tricorder to see if the data keys had been exposed. He saw a sudden energy spike on his tricorder's display.
What the hell was that? Geordi, I do not believe it is fair that you require me not to curse while you continue to do so. Not now, Data. That almost looked like a beam-in nearby. But the Bozeman is hours away. Geordi, it was a beam-in. Look.
Data was pointing straight ahead, across the excavation site, to the shape of a stranger in an environment suit that was not Starfleet issue. LaForge addressed the stranger.
Can I help you? First, move your hand away from your phaser. This is a restricted site. I won't be here long. I just want to ask a question.
The stranger's hand went for his belt. LaForge was ready to draw against him, but the stranger removed a flattened green cylinder about a half a meter long. LaForge tensed.
Whatever that is, put it down.
But the stranger did not move the cylinder.
Where is Jean-Luc Picard?
LaForge pressed the firing stud on his phaser. The blue beam shot out to the stranger, then evaporated in a blue nimbus around him. The stranger had a personal force field. He stepped toward LaForge.
Now it's my turn.
A puff of vapor blew out of the end of the cylinder. LaForge shoved Data aside as he sensed more than saw a dark streak rush past him. LaForge felt a giant's hand crush his chest. He felt the sudden bite of intense cold. He realized his suit must have been punctured. Data spoke with a voice of rage.
I will not let you hurt my friend. Then answer my question. Where is Jean-Luc Picard? Your weapon will not work on me. You will not succeed in fighting me. I have no intention of fighting you.
LaForge saw Data fall beside him, his limbs rigid in the stance he had taken to face the stranger. The stranger came to stand over the fallen friends. He glanced down at LaForge's suit. I estimate you'll freeze to death in less than 15 minutes. Tell me what I want to know, and I'll seal your suit and leave the robot, the android, intact. Your choice. LaForge spoke through shivering lips. Go to hell. The stranger pulled his hand weapon from his belt. Didn't anyone tell you
You shouldn't curse.
LaForge saw a blinding blue flash. His last thought was of all that was left when the star explodes. Cold and darkness and death. On the Cardassian mining station once called Terek Nor, now known throughout the Federation as Deep Space Nine, Data stepped around the frozen holographic recreations of his body. Geordi's and the strangers as he joined Riker, Troy, and Worf by the opening to the library structure. Riker looked at Data. "And that's it?" "Yes. I must assume he was not successful in his efforts." Troy shook her head. "But, Data, Geordi's environment suit was patched when the away team from the Bozeman found you. It's fair to conclude that the stranger took similar action not to harm you as well." Spock's voice echoed around them. "A most logical evaluation, Counselor. I believe it is time we accept the facts as they have been presented and stop referring to the assailant as the stranger." Riker regarded Spock with polite forbearance. "Ambassador, with all due respect, the assailant cannot be James Kirk." Spock continued, appearing not to hear the commander. "Computer, recreate the visitor to the Trilix site. Access the visual records downloaded from Lieutenant Commander Data's memory banks, and remove the visitor's helmet to show us his face." The helmet faded out, revealing a three-dimensional image of what was, in Data's judgment at least, a striking reproduction of the stranger's face as he had directly observed it. Riker interrupted. "That's enough, Mr. Ambassador. I've never denied the assailant looks like James Kirk, but the fact remains, Picard buried your friend himself." Spock's expression didn't change. "And those remains, Commander Riker, were then transported away by a group unknown. Therefore, I submit that Captain Kirk's body has been reanimated by a technology unknown to us. Our only question is, why has this been undertaken? Whoever they are undoubtedly connected to the Romulan Star Empire." Spock turned to the reproduction of Kirk and pointed the flattened green cylinder. "This is a device of Romulan design and manufacture, a popular item in demand by illegal arms dealers." Riker tensed. "Mr. Ambassador, is it possible the people who stole Kirk's remains on Viridian 3 were Romulans?" "It is likely." "And this Kirk clone looking for Captain Picard, he's using a Romulan weapon?" "You're identifying the pattern I have seen." "And exactly how many years have you spent working with Romulans, sir?" Spock's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting that I am somehow involved in these attacks against former members of Captain Picard's crew?" "You have pointed out a Romulan connection. You yourself are connected to the Romulans, and you were by Kirk's grave when the remains were stolen." "Commander, are you blind to the real pattern being developed here? Data, LaForge, you could be next, Commander." "Is that a threat, Mr. Ambassador?" "Vulcans never threaten, Commander. We only state our intentions. Good day." Spock swept past Riker toward the door. Then he was gone. Troy was incensed. "I can't believe you did that, Will." Riker looked shaken himself. "Neither can I. But there's something not right about Spock's involvement." The avatar of Tomet blazed among the stars, leaving no wake of rainbow light nor any other sign of her passing. She was fully cloaked in Federation space. On the starboard hangar deck, Kirk circled the battered shuttle parked in the forward service bay. He ran his fingers along its duranium hull and then looked up at Salatrell. "I don't recognize it." Beside him, Salatrell consulted her pad. "You shouldn't expect to. It's an old Montreal class, but the controls have been altered. You'll know how to fly it." "So flying a shuttle is another of my forgotten skills?" Salatrell nodded. Kirk glanced at the pad she held. "What is that thing for?" It's a medical monitor. Kirk stretched out a hand to lightly trace the smooth skin on her neck. He drew her to him, kissed her. Salatrell's communicator chimed. Commander Salatrell, we are nearing the launch area. Kirk headed toward the shuttle's open hatch, then turned back to Salatrell. What happens after I kill Picard? Salatrell smiled. Life begins again. Won't the Federation want revenge? Won't someone have to come after me? She gave his hand a squeeze of farewell. I'll protect you. Kirk entered the shuttle and performed as he knew he was expected to, waiting for the Avatar to drop from warp. Allowing a tractor beam to position his shuttle outside her cloaking field, remaining adrift as the Avatar departed without communication, undetectable by Federation sensors. Only when Salatrell and her ship were light years away did Kirk permit himself to consider her final words to him. Life begins again, she had lied. I'll protect you. She had lied again. Kirk also felt certain that Salatrell saw herself as the agent of his death. Perhaps he would never be able to answer all the questions that faced him in this new life. But as long as he could still take action, he knew he could survive. The engines came online. Kirk set his course for a place called Deep Space Nine and a man named Will Riker. Romulus was a gray world, ravaged by the constant tectonic stress of orbiting a double sun. Spock understood what it was that had drawn those first Romulans to this world, the need to give vent to emotions too powerful to be suppressed, just as the world's fiery core released its terrifying pressures in displays of blazing molten rock. Spock had returned to Romulus because it was the human thing to do. For his captain, for his friend, he could do no less. Spock glanced around the Dingla, a small Romulan eating establishment. Spock and his guests were well isolated in a shadowed corner, free to conduct their business. Tyrrell, a Romulan involved in dealing illegal arms, sneered at Spock.
What does a Vulcan want with Romulan weapons?
Spock lowered his voice, forcing Tyrrell and her companion Snell to listen more closely. Technically, the micropulsars are not weapons. They are military devices. An ancient, grizzled server with a limp approached their corner with 3 glass tankards of Greel. Spock lifted his tankard and made a show of holding the pale yellow liquid to the light. I prefer water. His tankard was taken away. He calculated he had 3 minutes, 15 seconds before the server would be able to confirm the fingerprints and DNA residue he had left on the tankard. Tyrrell wiped the foam from her mouth and wiped her hands on the Irk skin leggings she wore. Then she turned to Snell, her accomplice, a heavy-set Romulan, at least 10 years older. So, what do you think? Snell sucked on his teeth. Why? Spock gave him the explanation he had chosen. I wish to use the micropulsars to lay waste to the Central Hall of Records, and in the resulting social upheaval, establish myself as a dominant crime figure in the Romulan Star Empire. Snell looked at Spock in disbelief. You're joking. How will you pay for them? Federation credits? Starfleet requisition chits? Gold-press latinum? Interstellar letters of credit? You tell me. He was having the required effect. A wealthy, delusional Vulcan would be a dream come true. As far as they knew, Spock was merely an aide to one of the ceremonial cultural exchange missions that periodically traveled between Romulus and Vulcan. But that would change, Spock knew, in less than 90 seconds, and then he would become even more valuable to them. Tyrrell raised her tankard. I think this calls for a drink. Spock reminded Tyrrell, I am still waiting for my water. Tyrrell waved over the server. The server brought 3 more tankards of Greel and a large access pad. As Tyrell read the pad's display, Spock saw by her crudely controlled expression of elation that she now knew the Vulcan sitting across from her was not a second-level cultural attaché. She smiled grimly at Spock.
So, tell us, how long have you been working for the Cultural Exchange Commission, Ambassador Spock?
Then she reached under her tunic and brought out a battered palm disruptor.
What does your famed Vulcan logic tell you now, Spock? Who's going to pay the most to get you back in one piece? The Federation, Vulcan, or our own security forces?
Speaking as an interested participant, might I suggest that the logical approach at this juncture would be to contact your superiors for further instructions. Tyrell chewed the inside of her cheek, then she shrugged and turned to Snell.
He makes sense to me. I say we pass him on to Turco and let his organization handle the negotiations for turning him over to whoever pays the most.
Tyrell stood and motioned to Snell to do the same.
Okay, Spock, but don't try anything. Otherwise you're going back to Vulcan as a smudge on the floorboards.
Indeed. Spock suggested taking the back way out of the Dingla and allowed his two kidnappers to lead him to it, thinking that the sooner Romulus established ties with Vulcan, the better. If Tyrell and her like were their culture's brave new generation, Spock calculated the Romulan Star Empire wouldn't last another century. Near the end of their first day on board the Borg vessel, Picard and Crusher discovered a blind corridor that they had concluded served no purpose. A simply empty space with a viewport ignored by the collective, so it was safe. After only 2 days as stowaways, they thought of themselves as parasites in a living body, buried beneath deuterium and the plasteel. Flesh, engineered, transfigured, ripped from whatever worlds and forms that had first given it life, all to serve the collective. For Picard saw each fresh atrocity accompanied by the whisper of the collective voice deep in his mind, telling him that this was right, that this was good, that this was the way all should be and would be, the ultimate union of flesh and machine, the destiny of all forms. Picard saw Beverly check a readout on her wrist-mounted tricorder. "We're coming up on 70 hours, Jean-Luc." Picard nodded. Given what Starfleet knew about the transwarp conduits the Borg used, 70 hours of travel would take them far enough away from Federation space that they could not expect to return in their lifetimes. Picard was ready to take over the Borg vessel. Starfleet had specifically warned him not to attempt such a takeover during transwarp travel. But at the distance he and Beverly had traveled, death was already assured. All they had to do was choose the method. Picard held the neural interface in his hand. It had been fabricated by Shelby's R&D team to look identical to the implant plate the Borg had given him when he had been transformed into Locutus. He ran his fingers along the cranial plate. "Beverly, it doesn't feel the same." "It's not supposed to. It is designed only for limited transmission through the skin and skull. It's not even a direct connection." Over such a limited channel, he would be able to communicate directly with the Borg, but he could not be drawn fully into the collective, at least in theory. He took the interface from Beverly and rotated the metal tip in his fingers, feeling for the guide slots. All he had to do was slip it into place. Then he would hear the thoughts of the collective, and the collective would hear his. He moved the connector to its socket. He turned, and slowly lowered the interface because of what he saw. Beverly saw it too. "We're docking." Picard frowned. "But we're still in transwarp." Together they moved to the viewport. Their ship was moving toward what could only be a station of some sort, a Borg station in transwarp, unmoving against the multidimensional folds that rippled behind it. Picard at last understood. It's a hypercube, a shape that can only exist in 5 dimensions. On the outermost face of the nearest cube, the even texture of power conduits was broken by an irregular collection of shapes. Picard willed his eyes, perceived the face as a solid, unmoving object, stopping its wild oscillations. They're ships. Romulan warbirds. Picard felt bile rise in his throat. Beverly turned toward him. Could this be where the Borg originate? It doesn't seem large enough. And the Borg are three-dimensional beings like ourselves. Picard closed his eyes to try and stop the corridor from spinning around him. When he felt his equilibrium return, he opened his eyes again. The ship was closing in on that single face of the nearest cube. Picard pointed. That's where we'll dock. Beverly touched the interface in his hand. We have no way of knowing how strong the influence of the collective mind might be in these conditions. Perhaps we should explore the station first. Beverly reached up and disconnected the power cell plug from his armor. The snap of the connector triggered a wave of relief in Picard. Still, he took the interface from Beverly and slipped it into a storage pouch on his own armor. We'll keep this near. I'll keep this cranial plate on. Together they looked out to the viewport again. Jean-Luc, those warbirds, they're intact. They must have just been captured. That means there could be thousands of Romulans held captive here. Beverly's voice tightened. Being assimilated. No, the process takes time. It could mean there are thousands of able-bodied Romulan prisoners here, ready to fight back against the Borg. Beverly actually laughed. You mean you and I could lead a revolt here in a Borg station? I have always thought the Romulans could be a valuable resource in a galactic civilization. The Borg ship echoed with the dull clang of docking rings joining. Picard's stomach tightened with more than vertigo, but there was no turning back.